welcome to the Dad Hammer Podcast, a casual Warhammer show where we discuss all things 40k, Age of Sigmar, and literally everything else Warhammer related. So whether you are a beginner or a seasoned veteran, we are so glad that you've joined us on your Warhammer journey. I am your host, David the Warboss, and I am joined by the Chaplain. How you doing, Lee?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. Back from vacation, had 10 days in
Nice.
Florida, and got a little sun, not much. I don't, I used to back when I was in my teens and early 20s. I really cared about getting suntan, and now I'm just like, this is what I look like. This is it.
Well, it's good to have you back. I mean, I think I've not been on vacation, but I've also not been on the show for like what feels like a millennia. So it's good to be back. Good to be contributing to the podcast. So I guess this is a reunion. I don't know.
A little bit. I feel like it's I get a rotating cast of characters here on our show every so often, but it's good. I got to have different opinions and different personalities on here, and the scheduling is always difficult. And the past couple of weeks, it's been my schedule, but we've had other people out as well. So for all of our listeners and viewers, I really appreciate you sticking with us during the summer months. Sometimes it's a little challenging, but here we are. We've got a lot of great content to discuss. We're going to be looking at taking a little bit of an early look. I mean, a lot of people have gotten it already, but an early look at the Skaventide box set, which I actually have in my hands, and I have opened it, looked at it. That's about it, but I'll give my first impressions on the contents of the box set, which comes out in a couple of days. And then we're going to get into a Warhammer 101 segment that's been well received by our community, and feeling that is a benefit to all of our listeners and viewers. So we're going to do a Warhammer 101 segment on terrain building. Very specific topic, but something I think a lot of our crew and fans will be very interested in. We'll give you some tips and tricks on getting started, some things you want to think about. I've got plenty of mistakes that I've made after all of the terrain that I've built. So we'll share all of that and get into some good stuff. But before we get started on any of that, we've got another review to read off from Apple Podcasts. This one coming from, and I feel kind of bad for this particular person, but the name of the user is Worst WH Player. So Worst Warhammer Player. I mean, come on, you can't be the worst. There's plenty of us that have failed miserably at Warhammer in the past, and I think everybody goes through. You're only as bad as the opponent usually. Sometimes you play against someone that's been playing for years. And I remember when I first started and I played against our friend of the show, Lawson. Oh man, it wiped the floor with me like for 10 games straight. So I felt like the worst Warhammer player.
Well, what about when I can remember when I started back and
I didn't want to bring it up.
I mean, I never really played. Like when I was a kid, it was like we just rolled D6 and whoever got the highest got to destroy the other person's model. That was it. And it was like, oh, we move 8. Okay, what do I roll? A 6? Okay. Like, so, but I think what did we do? We did 500 points. And then it was like, okay. And then I think then I just jumped in the deep end. And next time I turned up, it was like 2,000 points of Marines.
That's what you wanted. You wanted that. I did not suggest it. Just so anyone listening, it wasn't we went to 500 to second game 2,000. That's what you wanted to do.
That was it. And then I think I lost. I don't know. I went on a losing streak forever, but just kept showing up. And then then eventually got the win, and it was a well-deserved win. But I mean, that's what you do. Just jump in the deep end. You'll work it out.
I remember you were so tired. Like at the end, at the end of the time that you won, like mentally, I felt like you were just so exhausted that when you did win, you're like, all right, well, I'm packing up my stuff. Like it wasn't much of a celebration, but because it's just, I mean, and I hate to say it like it's some stressful thing, but there's a lot to remember in this game, and all the strategy and all the cards and the synergies that go along with it. So it can be stressful. But anyway, we got off topic here. I want to go back to the review from Worst Warhammer Player. The title of the review, Awesome Warhammer Podcast. Thank you very much. It says, great podcast, great people, love to listen while painting, can only recommend. So short and sweet, but I really appreciate the comments as well as just stating that, you're listening to us while painting. I think that's cool because I listen to podcasts or I'll watch battle reports or things like that while painting. And I don't know what it is. It's just something that it almost acts as a motivation while
Mm.
I'm painting, because I don't love it. I do it, but I don't love painting. But if I've got some kind of Warhammer related content in the background, it gets me going. It's like, oh yeah, that's cool, and I keep going. So I don't know if that's what Lee. What do you usually listen to? Do you listen to another podcast or maybe a?
No, I'll listen to podcasts while I'm driving. Like, so if I'm driving somewhere, I'll listen back to our show. It sounds really weird listening to yourself. Like, it's like, oh, that's my voice.
Yeah.
But I listen to that, and then just a couple of different podcasts from different guys. So Vanguard Tactics, have a listen to that. I pick up some information from that. And then the Siege Studio guys, they have a great podcast about painting. Obviously, they're professional painters, but I like listening to them. They've got some good banter as well. And I think what's great about that is you're just constantly picking up and gleaning like little pieces of information that help you. So I think that's where listening to a podcast was where I got the first victory against you from. That someone said, if you pair, I think back in the day it was pair a captain with Hellblasters, you get the re-rolls. So I was like, oh, okay, now I got to go and buy a captain. So I went and bought a captain and then painted it up and turned up. And so I think like podcasts are great, but for me, depending on the mood, sometimes I'll watch a movie, usually a movie that I've seen before, it's just in the background, or I'll listen to some music when I'm painting. Just depends on what the mood is. Or sometimes if my wife is wanting to craft, she's got one of those cricket things that cuts stickers.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So like she'll be on one side of the table doing all that, and then I'll be painting, and then every once in a while she'll knock the table, and I'm like, oh, and I was like, oh, get your arms up on the table painting. But yeah, so just a variety of things, but it's either a movie or music when I paint, and then podcasts for the car.
Yeah, the other alternative, and something that I've done, I started watching, and I've mentioned this on the show, like retro 80s cartoons. So I'd watch like Gummy Bears or Ninja Turtles. Started watching like G.I. Joe and some Transformers and stuff. I don't, none of those cartoons you actually have to watch because, as a kid, they were the most amazing thing ever. As an adult, they're pretty bad. They're pretty rough. But it's always nice to have those playing in the background. And then when the GI Joe lesson, the now we know, because they're getting ready to set fire or something to their house, and somebody walks in and tells them not to do it. And I always like watching those. Those are my favorite part of the show. Anyway,
I digress. One time I watched Thundercats. I think I sent you a picture and was like, "Is this what you're supposed to do?" And I was watching.
Yeah.
And then I started looking at going, oh, I could do a Kroot army that looks like Thundercats. So I actually have
somebody's already done that,
Oh, there's a Kroot Thundercat looking one, but I then went and found like the show art and got a picture of it. So that's next to my painting desk, so I can look at that when I finally get to the Kroot that are currently in my pile of potential.
Very good. Well, speaking of which, let's get on to the pile of potential, but just one real quick shout out back to Worst Warhammer Player. Hopefully you have the ability to change your username. You got to be the, almost worst Warhammer player, slightly bad Warhammer player. Let's upgrade your game. Hopefully with some, tips and tricks that you're going to learn from us over the next few months, we can help you out. But really appreciate the review. A reminder to all of our listeners, you can submit reviews or just throw in a comment into our YouTube channel, just letting us know what you think of the content. Anything that you'd like to see, we're happy to read those on air as well. So we love the contribution. Keep the comments coming. Spotify, if you're a listener on Spotify, has just added a comments section as well to the app. So feel free to to reach us there, or send us an email at contact@dadhammerstudios.com. Okay, let's get on to the content here. I want to start though. Let's check out where we are. Lee, I know that you have a ton of stuff, so you've
Yeah.
been the most impressive out of all of us on the pile of potential and asking the question: have we made progress? Where are you? I got your pictures here that I'm gonna pull up, but before I do that, my update is while I was on vacation, you would think I'd get a ton of Warhammer painting done. I had really good intent. I brought all kinds of paints and everything. I got 4, I think they're called Vigilers from the Stormcast. They're the Stormcast guys with bows, basically, bow and arrow. I got 4 of those, about 70% painted. So, I don't know what it is. There was just always something else to do while we were there. And I never got to really sit down and focus on painting just because there was something else going on. So I am hoping to start those up soon. I'm going to do some live streaming on YouTube for anyone that's interested, doing a live stream content for showing how to paint Stormcast. Maybe get into some little things that I do. I'm not an expert painter, but maybe it'll be helpful to our listeners and viewers. So be on the lookout for that. All right, that's my last plug. Lee, I'm going to get over to you here. We're going to pull up your content up on the screen and talk about your pile of potential. You have made significant progress, my friend. Who are these Space Marines? And man, tell us about them.
Yeah, so they're Dark Angels. Just again wanted to go with a green army, like the color of green, and then that was kind of the real easy kind of decision. So what you've got there at the back is a ballistus dreadnought. I spent a good amount of hours on that, and then I took it to a game day and played against a friend of ours, a friend of the show, Marcus, and he toasted that thing in one move.
That's the way it works, man. That's the way it goes.
Some sort of like Drukari super lance thing, and he rolled 5s and 6s on that thing, on those things. There was like 4 or 5 of them, and then my saving throws were 1s and 2s. And then he looked at me and was like, "How many wounds?" I was like, 13. I think that's what it was. And then he was like, "Yeah, okay, so 22 plus damage." And I was just like, you didn't just like break its leg off and it just fall over and be like, "In duty, death ends," like this. It just boop, like it just disappeared. So
poof.
But yeah, so Ballistus Dreadnought, painted that, with the bone armor. And then in front of that is your Terminators with your Terminator Captain. You got the Chaplain in the back there. And then in the mix, there are the Infernus Marines, there are Infiltrators, and there is the Stern Guard as well. So I can't remember how much what I said I last painted and where I am, but that is my backlog of assembled Prime Marines done. So, and then created a Ashland base because I wanted them to be the dark green on the lighter base, just to give to help them kind of stand out. So, and I got that from Duncan Rhodes Painting Academy or something on YouTube. Watched that and was like, "Oh, I can do that." So yeah, and then in the left-hand corner, right in the corner, is an assassin, which I painted up a while ago, and just made sure that I changed the base and tied it up. So it was fun. For the Marines, for the Terminators and those in Terminator armor, I use stippling to do that, and then the rest are brush painted. But what I did do, and this was just more of my own frustration, is I spend forever trying to get the armor just right, and then I go in with the gold or the pauldrons and try and paint that, and then I was like, I'd always slip and end up with a smudge on the pauldron, and then I'll be like, now I've got to try and balance the paint and try and it's the perfectionist in me trying to get it just right. So for this lot, what I decided to do was I'm going to paint the small things first. So I started with that purple black like underpaint that I've done before, and then I used that as I mixed that in with the colors. So for example, when I started doing the leather, I would use the purple and black, mix that with the rhinox hide, and then start painting all the leather pouches and things, and do that first. And then the armor was the last thing I did, just because there was less mistakes that way. And
You know,
then
it's interesting. It's interesting that you go through the details first. You pick out the small bits first, and then do the armor on top. I've done the opposite,
mm,
and I think, but I've always considered like, well, wait a minute, if what's the bigger problem? Because if you get a little bit of the paint from the small, like the belt buckle or the strap, or something like that, if you get a little bit of brown paint on the armor, it's relatively easy to cover back up on the larger pieces. But if you, because the smaller things, the details, where you're doing all the edge highlighting and really getting in, if you put if you're sloppy with some of the armor on the pauldrons, for example, I'm doing a lot of stormcast. So if I get some of that gold paint on top of a corner of a belt,
mm,
it's not just, oh, I'll just put some more brown on there. I got to go do another base coat, another, I'll get some of the shadow in there with maybe a contrast paint and a highlight. So I'm curious, did you find where you were you having to do the opposite, so that if you're painting the details of a belt or something and you got some paint on the armor after you painted it or before, like, is that causing you problems, or were you able to do it faster now with this method?
once I'd got through the first couple of models, I found like it was faster,
Mm,
and easier. And then because of how I was painting, I wasn't just painting like one layer for the armor. So I was working through the tones and I was mixing them as they go to stagger them up. And then the last tone I used was Horus green. And I
mhm,
actually then got my paintbrush and then just started scratching all over the armor and like doing like little. So if you look closer at the armor, it's actually got like a mottled effect on it because of all the
mhm,
little scratches. So because that had so much work in it, doing the pauldron, the outline of the pauldron, doing the leather pouches first was easier because I could correct that. That was a lower cost to correct than having to go in and then work back up through the shades and colors. And then what I then did was, to tie it all in, I had a Tamiya panel liner, enamel ink that I would put, and I'd literally just go crazy all over it, which would give it that grim dark. And then I would go in, and then the last highlight color, I'd go back in and just, put chrome on the silver pieces to make them pop. I'd use Evil Sun's Scarlet, I think it is, on the red to make it really
mhm,
pop. So when you look at it, there's some key things that really jump out, and that
mhm.
was just what I did. So a lot of time the enamel wash that went over it just hid some of those blemishes, and then I just then brought them back up with the highlights. So I just found
They
it
look
that,
great.
so they look great as well on the table. They look
Yeah.
cool. So, and I think it's only a matter of time. The more I do it, the more I'm going to get quicker at it. So I enjoyed it. I enjoyed painting it that way.
Yeah, I would, and they do look great. I would encourage our listeners to that, if you are feeling like you can't get your painting up to a certain standard, or you see someone else's uh, paint that's better. I mean, I hate to break this to you, there will always be someone that does a better job at painting, and it is a journey. I painted for a long time, but sometimes I'm just not feeling it, and I can't get the colors right, the shades don't look right, and usually that's because I don't really care about the army or the model. For whatever reason, it's just not my favorite. But Lee, I've heard you come over to my house and tell that you could really see a difference in, like, the Votan, which are my favorite army. I
Mm,
love painting those guys. You said there's a difference in quality compared to even the orcs, which I was just trying to get. There's so many of them to get on the table, but at the end of the day, like, they're going to look good, because most, as a reminder, we're now, especially of the older crowd, it's going to be harder for us to see, but you're going to be looking at it from like 3 or 4 feet away, right?
Mhm.
You're not going to get up close. You're going to maybe want to see that really cool looking tank or character model or something. You want to pick that guy up and rotate it around and look really close. But the majority of the troops, no one's ever going to know that you highlighted the armpit, and and it looks just stunning,
Mm.
But I think what you've done is you picked out little bits to make them pop, like using the Evil Sun Scarlet is going to make that red pop just a little bit, so that when someone's passing by, just kind of looking at it at during a game or something, they're going to see that little bitty pop of color, and it does make a difference. It heightens the immersion. It gives you more of a comic book type of a feeling to the game, which I think just heightens it
Mm.
overall. So well done on the army. Much more progress than I have
Yeah.
made. Hopefully I can, I am trying to get things going because I've got this is my segue going into the Skaventide box set that I have in my hands. Well, it's around my desk. I'm not actually going to pick it up because I'll hit my microphone and everything will come crashing
Cracking
down.
down.
But yeah, so I did want to segue over into the Skaventide box. I know the majority of our listeners are 40K, but anytime there's a new edition of anything, I always get excited. I mean, it doesn't really matter what the game is. I get excited because there's a new toy that's out, and I always like to see what's in the box. So what I'm going to pull up first, we're going to go through, and these are things that everyone's already heard of. I just wanted to give my initial impressions of them up front. I haven't poured through every single volume, of the book at all, but wanted to throw up a couple of pictures I have and just have some comments. First of all, this is the core rule book for those that are watching on YouTube or on Spotify. The core rule book artwork I really like. I like the figure, the Stormcast figure on the front. It's a very imposing looking figure. Um, the Leviathan one from 40K was all right. It was a little more subtle with the helmet, the Tyranid thing. It was okay. It just didn't really pop for me as much.
Mm.
It kind of goes into the background. This is a pronounced, oh man, what is that? What am I getting ready to read? I like the full body artwork on the front of a Stormcast Eternal. I don't know who this character is. Jeff. I have no idea what his name is, but it's a cool looking piece of artwork for the front of the book, which I liked. The other picture I have here is, and I'll throw it up full screen. Again, this is just coming from my phone, so it is an intro on choosing your way to play Age of Sigmar. And I think throughout the book they did a really good job of segmenting the process for if you were a new player or a new, not just new to Warhammer, but new to Age of Sigmar. You come from 40K, you played another game, Kill Team or something like that, and you're wanting to know how to play and which of these different named things do I start? Spearhead, Path to Glory, or Matched Play. Most of us know what matched play means, right? That's a competitive play. But if you've never gotten into Age of Sigmar, you're not going to know what Spearhead or Path to Glory is. So Spearhead is the combat patrol version for Age of Sigmar from 40K. It's the smaller game that has pre-printed abilities and rules, and it's all kind of encapsulated in this box where you buy a box of models and you put all those together, and then you download the free stats and rules, and away you go. And then Path to Glory is the narrative side, which in my opinion, the narrative component for Age of Sigmar is the stronger piece of the game, just because of the variety in some of the missions. So we've talked about this on the podcast previously, where in the 40K missions, the variety is usually coming from, take this objective, but in the third battle round, it's double the points, or in this battle round, you get to move the objective, and that's all well and good. It makes for some really fun games, but the narrative component in Age of Sigmar is usually something kind of crazy. It's like the earth is cracking in two, and if you're on the fault line, you'll take mortal wounds. And then I remember one mission, I want to say it was in White Dwarf, maybe a while back, where it had two like Colossus characters from Age of Sigmar, and the whole battle was them coming together, but you had other armies around them. And I'm trying to remember what the two armies were, but when those two single models got closer together, they were required, I think, to like charge each other, and then any
Wow.
of the troops that were kind of in proximity or in the way would take all mortal wounds because, and it's just like, wow, that is such an epic
Yeah.
moment and in a game mechanic. And this is what Age of Sigmar does. So again, I've only played around 6 or 7 games of Age of Sigmar, but every time I've played, it's a closer game. It's
Mm.
never really over by turn 2, like 40K can be. And I'm not trying to dump on 40K at all. I love 40K. I play it all the time. And that's usually my preferred game. So just to be clear, I absolutely love 40K, but Age of Sigmar has a completely different feel to it. And I think that just throughout the previous editions, I've been really impressed. So, with that said, I just wanted to take a couple of screenshots here. I've got another one that is just the artwork in the book is really stunning. This is just, I believe, a Stormcast model, maybe one of the newer ones. I can't tell if this particular Stormcast model is coming down from the heavens after it's been, essentially reincarnated or reforged or whatever. But this is an example of the artwork. It's very visual. I like how it overlaps a couple of pages. It's not just on one page. The Leviathan book did that. It had some of the 2-page spread with the text in it. But as someone who doesn't just love to read, I like having it's going to sound so elementary. I like having pictures. Yeah. But I like where the artwork sets up more of the cinematic part of what you're reading, especially when you're looking at a rule book and you're trying to learn about the past of the game. And I loved this picture. This is one of the this is a Skaven, and I cannot remember the guy's name. The big like Rat King thing. Man, I'm a Skaven player, and I can't think of his name. Vermin Lord. Yes, Vermin Lord. Thank you. Yeah, you don't even play, and you're already remembering. This is how bad my memory's gotten. But again, this is a cool picture with a lot of pop and a lot of color to it, where it's talking about the history and what's going on and why the Age of Sigmar world is what it is right now. I just thought this example of what it's showing within the book is really, really cool. So I was very impressed overall with just the book, the core rule book. Flipping through the pages, it's your standard fare of core rules, and this is how to move. This is how I had a lot of pictures and a lot of examples. I haven't really gotten into the rules themselves yet, but my first impression, just with the layout of the book, I really liked. I remember in the previous edition and 3rd edition of Age of Sigmar, one of the things they took and put into 10th edition of 40K was they would highlight keywords. So in the rules, you would see certain words and certain things highlighted, like in block text, almost like if you're in a Word document and you did a word and then you chose to highlight that word. Very similar, but it drew your eye to it. And I think in Leviathan they did that with the core rule book on 10th edition. They would point out keywords and the summaries at the bottom. A lot of that stuff they took from Age of Sigmar. So in essence, I sometimes I feel like Games Workshop play tests some new things with rules and how they construct their books with Age of Sigmar or lesser games, so that they can, and lesser I mean by sales, and they could pump those cool features that everybody likes hopefully into their mainline games, and then vice versa. So anyway, I really liked the core rule book so far, just as a first flip through. It was really cool. The next thing that the box set came with is what's called a Fire and Jade Spearhead book. So I'm going to put this up here on the camera. This is the Spearhead book that it's got the core rules of Spearhead on how to play the game. It's got some pictures on what to do, and then the rest of it is really just picking out your various armies for Spearhead. It's got the stats and everything that you would expect. My only, it's not really an issue. It's just it's more of a question. It's a really nice book, right? It's always nice to have an extra book or something while you're getting your box set. I don't know why this exists. It's nice to have because if you are getting your models together and you're ready to walk out the door and you're going to go to a game store to play a game of Spearhead, you would have your models, your dice, and your rulers and everything. And this book literally would be everything that you would need. You would need to bring the whole core rule book with you, and extra stuff. You've got all of the war scrolls, not the data sheets, the war scrolls with you with all the stats of the units, which is all well and good, but that stuff's free online. So I guess my thing is if they're going to make it free, which I think they should, if they're going to make the stats and the rules free, the book's nice, but I'd almost rather it be an alternate buy, kind of like the faction packs they're doing now. Like, if you got to have your rules and your stats in a book, here's an extra thing that you could buy for $30 or something, and you can have this is everything that you need. And the reason I say that is that I would rather them put in extra terrain or some maybe additional models, or I mean, there's a ton of models in here, but put some extra. I mean, terrain would probably be the easiest thing. Maybe throw in some faction dice along with it instead of the book. So, Lee, I know you're not necessarily getting the Skaventide box set, but I mean, do you feel like this is especially coming from someone who's never played Age of Sigmar, but even with 40K, if you're getting a box set and this is only combat patrol rules and stats, for example, is that of value, or would you rather have some other kind of physical piece of terrain or model or dice or whatever?
Yeah, I think if it's available online, which it is, and we've all seen those this week drop that it with the faction actual like I can't think what the faction war scrolls.
Faction packs, yeah.
Yeah. So I've got Seraphon and Sylvaneth that I'm painting up. Never played them, but working on them right now. I've got the Carnosaur, being painted. But when I scroll down, the spearhead's there, so I can see that there. So for me, I'm like, there's no point in that book if I can get that all online. But if you're a collector and you like collecting the books, I could see why. I don't know if there's additional artwork in there that you probably don't get online.
Not
But
really.
I think for me, like I just want everything that I need to play the game.
Mhm.
So if I need, I'd rather have some more terrain if the rules are already free, or a limited edition model that only comes out in that box set that you'll never get elsewhere. So, put me a Skaven, I don't know. I don't know. Something something Skaven is something, Stormcasty that's only available with that box set.
Mhm.
Make it a absolute exclusive model. Do that, then put in another book, or just combine that book with the core rule book and just call it a day. I think that's what happened with Leviathan. I think the rules for combat patrol were in Leviathan. So do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but the only thing there is that would be a really thick book. I'm gonna hold these up to the camera here, and you're gonna see, like, if you put them both together, that's a thick boy. I mean, you're gonna have a pretty thick novel on your hands if you're including all of the army's spearhead, stats and things.
Oh, I was more put the rules in the core book and then keep the stats online because they're going to change, as balance happens.
I don't know. I don't think the spearhead stuff isn't going to change.
You don't think?
If if it is, it's going to be very small. At least
Yeah.
if that's what happened with Combat Patrol.
Mm,
Um, but the core rules themselves within the Fire and Jade book are already in the core rule book. I think the
mm,
point of it is just we're going to copy paste the core rules into the Fire and Jade book, so you can have it with you and also have your army stats to take along with you. Now you don't
mm,
have to take the core rule book, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not. This is not a complaint. This is more just an observation that I like having, a cool book. This is an extra thing in the box, and I always like, opening up more stuff. I think it's cool, but I wish it was an extra model or some terrain or
Mm.
something like that. But anyway, I I'll be using this. I assume when we play Spearhead, if I'm going to a game store or something, I guess I won't need the core rulebook, which will be nice.
Yeah.
The only other things that this were included in this, of course, all the sprues. I've got now a mountain of a pile of potential to go through. Comes with the battle tactic cards and the twists, which are similar to the 40k mission deck that you got with Leviathan. And then, of course, the faction packs are free and available, at least until their battle tomes come out. And then I guess they'll do the same thing they did, like what they did with 40k with the index. They would release the index, which is the original stats. Everybody got really excited about, oh man, finally all the rules are free. And then as soon as they came out with the codex, they locked those behind the paywall. So, we can get into this topic for another day. But just something I was thinking about, which was, I wonder if Games Workshop's sales are really that reliant on their books. Are there huge margins on their book sales? Maybe so. Maybe it's cheaper, and then they can charge $60 or more for a book, and it's cheaper to print that out, and their cost is low versus putting out miniatures and plastic and all the molds and the shipping and everything that goes along with that. Maybe the margins are smaller for miniatures. I don't know. This is Games Workshop is one of the few that invests so heavily in their books and doesn't make it available free online. Maybe Dungeons and Dragons would be the opposite, but because they're everything about them is so narrative heavy, so it makes sense is that it's that way. But this is something we can talk about in the future on our podcast. But again, I like the Skaventide box. I'm really excited to dig into all the different materials and hopefully play our first Spearhead game coming up soon. And I got a lot to put together and paint. So, all right. Now let's shift over now to our reoccurring segment. Now we've really started to get some good feedback on this on Warhammer 101. We're going to cover terrain building. And for those that are brand new to the game, I'll say that you absolutely do not have to build your own terrain. You don't have to buy your own terrain. You can use, Coke cans, Kleenex boxes, cardboard, whatever you have lying around will work just fine for terrain. And if you want to get even extra cheap, you can just do like a little paper cutout and draw a box that says like ruin on it and cut it out on a piece of paper and stick it down on the ground. Because if you think about when you look at any of the battle plans or the mission statements within the books for 40k or Age of Sigmar, it's all from a top-down view anyway. So it tells you where to place everything. As long as you can do theater of the mind and imagine that it's a destroyed building, you really don't have to have terrain. That said, cool looking terrain really helps immerse you in the game, and I highly recommend it. So what we're going to do here is, Lee, I'm going to start with you. We're going to give some tips, different things. I think I have built the most terrain out of both of us, or out of the two of us, but you have done something that is unique that I have not tackled. So I'm gonna throw this up on the screen for those that are watching on YouTube. But if you wouldn't mind, explain what we've got here. What kind of terrain we're looking at, and maybe this is the stage 1 of 2. This is not the completed work.
Yeah. So the idea of drawing inspiration from different things, I was watching Kong Skull Island, and I was like, man, I'd love to make some jungle terrain. I had a jungle terrain map already from I think it was Frontline Gaming. It was a jungle, and I was like, man, that would be so cool if I could do that. And then we have a store pretty local to us that sells things cheap, dirt cheap. That's its name. But they there was a ton of like this greenery stuff, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna buy that. And some like almost like mossy stuff, and I was like, I'll just buy it. And I think it was like I walked out with there for about $5-6 for like a massive bag of this stuff, and I was like, I'll use it at some point. And then I was the local Walmart, and then there were these skulls that were available, and I was like, oh, they look cool. They'd look like a cool, part of terrain. So got those, and then that pink foam I picked up at Home Depot. That's just garage insulation foam. And then one day I just came across, just the idea of, cool, I could make these columns. I could stick it down, stick it together. So really what I did was I got a cutter. I used a box cutter and cut straight lines.
Hmm.
And then I used a foam cutter that you can get on Amazon, or you can use a box cutter, and just began to create the structures. I'd use cocktail sticks to hold them in place. And then I think I used wood glue. And then the skulls, again, put them down, glued them on, and then I used some. It's just like a paper mache, we'd call it. I can't
Hmm.
remember.
Hmm.
Sculptor mold or sculptor melt or something, and use that to create that texture. And just kind of went for it and just used my imagination, always trying to think of what the end was in insight. Okay, this is what I want it to be, a overgrown jungle temple feel. That's where I was going for it, and just went for it really, and just was like, let's see what happens, like proper Leroy
Yeah.
Jenkins style. Just
And so for our listeners, the pink insulation foam, I think that the best way to describe it, if you've seen the Superman movies where he's like the old ones, where he's taking the little crystals out and putting them
Mm,
into the Fortress of Solitude to communicate with his dad or whatever. They have these little crystals. It's what it almost looks like an alien world
yeah,
combined with a swamp or jungle. But that's before. That's the before picture. The after picture is like, oh, now it really comes together. And I'm going to show that here in a second. But what I wanted to point out here is that you have to start when you just said just went for it. You got to start somewhere. Just
yeah,
throw some stuff together. The skulls, I think. By the way, go to any hobby store, craft store, maybe like the week after Halloween is
yeah,
over, and everything will be on sale. Everything will be on clearance. Go to your dollar store. You can get something really cheap. And I've got one picture that I'm going to throw up here in a second of mine. But let's go to the after here, and you
yeah.
can see, holy moly, like just complete difference with some extra flock, and you really use that moss to big time effect on these things.
Yeah, so the amount of stuff that I had to use to kind of stick that. I got tacky glue, which is this thick, like super thick PVA, and put that on the columns, and really stuck that down, and then did I don't know how many layers of like matte varnish, just spray it and stuck it
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
Even around the base, base is a mixture of sand, stones, flock. And then for the columns themselves, when that pink foam, you make that pink foam, you can't just spray it because the solvent in the can will eat the plastic. So you have to seal
Hmm.
it. So that has a seal over it, which is black paint and PVA glue. Just painted it all over, and it becomes like pretty rock solid. And then kind of then started with the dry brush, the grays, and then I added some blues and some purples just to give it that kind of dark kind of jungle feel.
Hmm.
And then just kind of went for it. And I think I got that all done maybe over the course of like 3 days, with drying time and stuff. And because in the end I was like, I want a jungle environment. And what was beautiful about it was when we played the game, it actually felt really like jungly. It sounds really weird, but like, where you think of like jungle warfare, you think it's like tight spaces. It's not
Yeah.
wide open urban landscape. It's very tight and very narrow. So when we were deploying, we had to work out, okay, can I get the dreadnought through there? Okay, this is going to block line of sight. It really felt very enclosed. And that's what you want from your train. The train is not there just to look nice. It does, but it also shapes the feel of the game.
Hmm.
So that jungle terrain, because there's a lot of pieces on it on the board, it really felt like it was an immersive kind of jungle experience. So yeah, so you know, it looked great on the table,
Yeah.
and I had a lot of comments at the game store about people like, "Oh, you made that?" And I'm like, "Yep, I tried,
And
and it
that's
worked."
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what really works about this terrain too is like you have a lot of overhang and
Mm,
overgrowth. So the shrubs and the trees and the vines and the moss and all this stuff, you made a lot of different pieces that are going to spread out, but it doesn't have to just be jungle. I know you've got a lot of trees and plants and things, but it obviously fits best in a jungle environment.
mm,
But if you wanted to, because you've made this, it's green and rocks and earth, you could put this in if you had a mountain type of a battle mat, you could put maybe a section of this terrain over off to the right, and then put more generic rocks or something, so that if you wanted to have a temple, for example, in the middle of a battle mat, you could put some other things around it, so that you don't have to just completely consume an entire mat. So one of the things that I was going to mention as just as a tip is, when you're building terrain, you can kind of go two different ways. One, you can go on a theme, and in your mind, you said, I want to play jungle theme, which I
mm,
think is super cool because, but at the same time, that can still apply to other. If you're like me and you buy a lot of different battle mats, I just like the different colors and settings and they have. But you can apply this terrain on other battle mats and it not just completely destroy the immersion. So making your terrain as generic as possible, but also this is fairly cheap. Like,
mm.
my guess is that you probably got all this terrain for maybe around, I don't know, $15-20 after all said and done, after maybe not after the glue and the foam and everything. But is that about right? 25 $25
Yeah,
or so?
yeah, I mean, I would probably go up a little bit. The skulls weren't I didn't get them in the sale, so they were a little bit
Okay.
more
Okay.
expensive, so I would say all in, and there's a lot of terrain there,
Yeah.
probably 50, 60 with all the paints and
Okay.
stuff like that,
Okay.
but that's a full gaming board. That's a full immersive experience, and it was fun doing, it was fun just flexing that different creative muscle, so,
Yeah.
yeah,
The 50-60 bucks, I mean, you're gonna pay at least that for one building
yeah,
within, if you go buy it from Games Workshop. And there's nothing wrong with buying the plastic kits from Games Workshop. When I first started building terrain, I started with mostly rocks. So I would buy the pink insulation foam, that's the thick stuff, and I would just stack it on top. If you go out and you look at some YouTube videos or you Googling this, there's tons of people making these. Um, they're like mountains, but they just look like foam levels, like two or three levels of rock stacked on top of each other. And I did a lot of that.
yeah,
Um, and that's fun, right? And that applies to everything. But what I eventually, and that's really cheap, what
mm,
I eventually moved to was trying to create buildings out of cardboard. And that's the other one of the tips that I wanted to throw out too, is that you need to set your expectations
mm.
appropriately, because no matter how crafty you are and how awesome you are at carving up cardboard, it's still going to be cardboard. Now, there's all kinds of ways that you can get the cardboard itself to look a little more realistic. You can get different types of cardboard to make it look more like a shack or something, popsicle sticks, or all these different types of methods. It's never going to look as good as a finely crafted mold plastic kit from Games Workshop. Um, but as long as you set your expectations appropriately, what I would recommend, and I'm going to throw up some of my stuff here. What I would recommend, this is a piece that I did, which is a combination of Games Workshop official kits and then some different pieces of cardboard and foam. And I actually use the foam core board, which is more like I don't know how else to describe it. It's like the poster board type stuff that's like maybe a quarter of an inch thick. But this is an old kit that was available through Games Workshop, that they don't make anymore, unfortunately. But it was called Honored Imperium, and it is a statue of a Space Marine. It comes with this cool 40K, the double eagle symbol.
Mhm,
So I took that and the statue and I made a little base out of it, almost like um, I don't know what you call it, like a pillar for the statue to sit on. And I put some, other things around it. to make it look like steps. And then I also printed off, found some posters online. You can find these little bitty pieces of paper that look like propaganda posters. I printed those out and cut those and put them all around, and it looks like a kind of a destroyed village square almost. And I made the tiles like it used to be a road there or something. I made those out of like poster card type pieces of paper, and just put those out, cut those out in squares so it looked like road tiles. But I mean, this came out pretty good, I would say. But it is a combination of using an official Games Workshop kit and then some other things. And I even took the posters and put them on the steps and things like that. So I mean, but that kit was probably, I want to say, $40-50 just with the statue and the double eagle, and then there's another little ruin piece. And then I put it on a piece of wood, and then put sand and all kinds of stuff all over it. So I think, and I've got another example here. This is not as impressive, but it is taking an official kit. This picture, for those listening, is of the wildwood trees that you can still buy today. It's just the circle of trees that you're supposed to use if you're a Sylvaneth player to move those around the battlefield. I actually wanted to create it as a terrain piece, and I've got 2 of them that I can set down and in other situations, whether it's 40K or Age of Sigmar. It works both on both sides. But I did the trees. I put those on a piece of wood and put green flock everywhere and just kind of doctored it up a little bit. And then this last one I wanted to show is one with more of a snow and winter feel. And Lee, this is very similar to what you did, where I took some skeletons that I bought from, I think I got them off of Amazon shortly after Halloween, so they were on sale. But I got like this, it's going to sound terrible. I got like this skeleton dog, and then cut it all up with some, like a box cutter and stuff to take the rib cage and kind of put that, some kind of prehistoric monster that had died in this, winter tundra type environment. And then I took foam core board, or rather the pink insulation foam, and carved it up to make it look rocky and stuff. But I mean, it's the same thing that you did, the exact same thing. It's just different skulls, different skeletal elements, and use the same type of foam core stuff. You were going for more of a jungle, ruin, rocks and things like that. I was going for more of all of these animals died in the middle. It's almost the prehistoric kind of era. So I would encourage our listeners just to experiment. I mean, there's really no wrong way to go about it. And I think the comments, Lee, that you've gotten from peers and also from your family, they're like, wow, that looks really cool. And I think that, I don't know about you, but my experience with making terrain made me feel more, I guess, more like in the world when I'm playing a game, and just having something there. You could almost feel the cold wind, or looking at, going back to, I'll pull up the pictures again of yours, but just looking at this, I'm just like hearing animals, that are running around in these different scenarios with the jungles, but like the Tyranid video that they had with everything coming out of the jungle, which is really cool. So were you getting that feel when you were playing your game, is what I was getting to?
Yeah, definitely. Like, it definitely was that jungle feel. We were at a game store, so it was hard to put on the music in the background, but I would imagine but then I was like, oh man, wouldn't it be really cool if somehow I could just drop, dry ice into the eye socket and then have that spewing out? Like,
oh man,
so
that would be cool.
It's suddenly like there was more creativity. But the same thing was like when I remember playing on your snow base. Just at one point, I think it was Tau army, and you had orcs like charging down the field towards me. And there was a moment where in my mind I was picturing like just these trucks like rolling down through the snow, and I was like, and I think that's it. And I think for anyone who's looking to build terrain, like, start a little bit smaller. And in fact, if you go onto our onto our YouTube channel, we've got a tutorial about how to use that pink foam to create those modular lands, and that's really great for 40k, but it's also great for Sigma as well. If you're looking to start, that's a great place to start. And then we also have how to paint those plastic kits, how to just a little bit of work, a little bit of dry brushing, you can really make that, and that's on there as well. So those are two easy places to start. And then there's just Leroy Jenkins it. Just go for it. Have an idea and just go for it, or just jump online and go Martian landscape or ice bases and just see what happens and what's available.
There's plenty of tutorials. I mean, you really just kind of pick your poison on what type of environment you want to create. I did want to end our segment with some essentials that, at least for me, that I would recommend if you're thinking about this. All sounds great. I can't wait to go build my own terrain. If you're not going to buy one of the pre-made kits from Games Workshop or all the other companies that are doing like the laser wood cutting, those are all fine. There's nothing wrong with those. I've even seen some where it's like almost like a pop-up book where you unfold it and then the terrain pops up. There is no wrong answer. I think just having some terrain is worth your time, but making it, I think you can come up with some pretty good results, and hopefully you've seen that with our pictures. But I would say number one, pink insulation foam is we use that a lot. It's so easy to work with. It's very cheap. If you live in the United States, you can go to Home Depot or Lowe's, and you go back and there's a giant sheet. I mean, it is a huge sheet of pink insulation foam that you could break, in half with your knees if you wanted to, if you had to get it in your car. But one sheet of that insulation foam will last you a very long time. I mean, I still have some left over, and I've made, I don't know how many rocks. I've probably got like 25, 30 different rocks, and they're big ones. They're not little ones. So that should last you forever. As Lee mentioned, I would get a box cutter of some kind, and also maybe a wire foam cutter. You can get those online. And it's basically, if you haven't seen one, you can get them that plug in or even with a battery, but it has a thin wire that you use to run over it. It heats up, so be very careful with it. But it heats up and you run it over the foam and it just kind of cuts it. So you can make it into all different shapes, curves and things, and it makes it great for cutting out rocks. A glue gun, plenty of glue sticks, especially if you're doing rocks. Super glue if you're doing more things like with the plastic kits and stuff, obviously. And then, Lee, I know you've got a lot of flock and different things. What were you using for? Were you just using play sand, or what were you using for the gravelly bits on top of your terrain?
Yeah, so I got play sand and then like pea gravel. So that gives me some different textures. And then I got from Army Painter, they do different flock as well. So I had that. And then I did buy some texture paste from texture texture so it sounded very, very British then. Texture paint from AK Interactive. So that would be a big part. So I'd put that on as well, because the more different textures you have, the more it feels real. But that's really what I did it, and I just put everything together. I put the rock and the sand and the flock together in a thing, mixed it up, coated everything in PVA, and then just poured it on and then knocked off the excess. Or I put the texture paint down and then did the same. So
I see. Yeah, I've used. I bought a bag of play sand, and I mean it's a giant bag that you would use to fill a sandbox. So it's a big bag of play sand. My one tip, if you're going to go this route, I would not go to a craft store and buy the little bitty bags of play sand. They're going to charge you 10, 15 bucks for a very small bag of fine sand. You don't need that stuff for terrain. Go to your local, hardware store or something and tell them you're looking to fill a sandbox and buy. Usually you can buy a small bag, and by small, I mean, it's not going to be small. But I learned out the hard way. if you're going to use play sand, it does have moisture still in
Mm.
it. So make sure you let that dry overnight. Put it on some kind of pan or a big Tupperware bin, and just let it and smooth it out a little bit into a single layer and let that dry. And then just rinse and repeat over the course of a few days, and you're going to have more sand than you're ever going to need. I mean, that stuff will last forever. And then finally, I would say get some flock of some kind, especially if you're doing kind of what Lee did. Go to your bargain store, get a bunch of let your imagination run wild. Get some, aquarium terrain, and a lot of people look at that stuff for greenery and things. You can buy a bottle of green grass flock off of Amazon, and I think I bought mine like 3 years ago, and I've used maybe 5% of it. And I've done a ton of terrain, so it will last a very long time. So, I mean, make some investments here if you've got the funds to do so. But at the same time, I think you can find a lot of material around the house. You'll never look at insulation or packing peanuts or packing foam the same every single time.
Yeah.
Lee, I'll get pictures from you. You're like, hey, look at this crazy piece of styrofoam. Will this work for terrain?
I tell you what, I had my daughter had the Hubba Bubba, like the bubble gum that
The
comes in
gum. Mm-hmm.
the solid, like they're like circle things. They have all these ridges in them, and she was about to throw it out, and I was like, no! And I was like, give it here. She's like, what? And I was like, look. So I like snipped it in half and turned them this way, and then I got 4 of them, and I was like, power generator, and she's like, Dad, you're weird, and I'm like, it works. So I've got 2 power generators to build for the urban, thing. So I
Very
think
nice.
it's just use your imagination. Even kids' broken toys,
Mm.
and if you can't afford that, and your kid has got Lego, build a Lego castle, build Lego
Yeah.
walls, build, if they're any,
Don't
it's
paint it. Don't put flock and paint on that.
but like it's there. So even trash, anything that looks, you can make stuff because
Yeah,
of and you just got to go for it and just try it.
absolutely. Well, hopefully this is helpful for anyone looking to get into the terrain building game. Please share pictures either with us on Instagram, send us an email, contact@dadhammerstudios.com. Let us know what you make. If you've got cool pictures of terrain, and maybe you'll inspire us. I'm always looking for some new thing to make. So please send that to us. And that'll actually do it for this episode of the Dad Hammer podcast. Thanks to the chaplain. I appreciate your time, your attention, and your service, kind sir. I am David the Warboss, and until next time, remember that your pile of potential boxes, and mine are considerable now, can double as terrain, right? It goes
That's
along
it.
with our Warhammer 101. All right, take care, everyone, and we'll see you next time.